Hi everyone, Dr. Nicole LaPera, the holistic psychologist here. So I talk a lot about ego work. This video is going to be on the 4 stages of awakening to the ego. So first and foremost, what is the ego? The ego is, whenever you hear yourself thinking or talking and you say the word I, whatever comes after I is a statement based in the ego. It's this conceptualization really of who I am, maybe of who others are in the world. Maybe it's a conceptualization of who and what the world is. It's a sort of self-definition. The reality being, it's only part of ourself. It is not who we actually are. Who we are is something that's called consciousness. It's the ability to observe this part of ourself. So how do we begin to break out of living life in ego? The first stage is what we're calling the lack of ego awareness. It's when we're unconscious. It's when many of us aren't even aware that we have this part in our mind called the ego. We just think that the definition that we've been operating around is who we are and is how things are in the world for us. We are often reactive. We feel very defensive when our stories are challenged. So a lot of times this looks like if I have a belief about the world and someone across from me has a counter belief about the world, I can often feel threatened by their belief being different from mine. And sometimes that looks like outer reactivity, arguing. A lot of emotions get touched when our sense of self, when our definition of self, our ego definition of self is challenged. So this is what we think of when we think of life being lived unconsciously before we awaken. So what are we awakening? We're awakening to the consciousness that is us, bringing us to stage 2, which is when we come to realize that we do have an idea of who we are. We do have a story about ourselves, others in our world, and the world at large. We are repeating that story, many of us, throughout our day, all day long. So this stage is when we come to the reality that we have an internal dialogue that is separate from who we are. Who are we? The witnesser of that endless story about ourselves throughout the day. So once we wake up and we see, this is the first opportunity we're seeing our thoughts. And what a lot of us are seeing is they're very repetitive and they tell ourselves the same narratives over and over again, usually based around a story of who we are. Once we've woken in that way, what we're waking is the consciousness. I am the conscious observer. That's who I am. The next stage we evolve into is what I'm calling the witness or consciousness. So what that allows us to do now is to hold ourselves in that awareness space. So when we're in the stage 2, we often are still reactive. We know we're telling ourselves stories when that person does that thing, but I still can't stop the reaction that follows. I either detach, dissociate, however I take care of myself, or I do something external. I scream, I yell, whatever. So we're still in that reactive state. So when we evolve to stage 3, we're able more and more to maintain that position as that conscious observer. So what we're evolving to is even if I'm in some triggering situation and I can see my stories, my ego is telling me, that person's disrespecting you, this is where you kick and scream and yell, I'm able to stand in my awareness and make a new choice. This is where I evolve to what we call responsiveness. So doesn't mean though that my story's not running, doesn't mean that I'm not compelled to kick and scream and yell and tell this person how wrong they are. I probably am. This just means I have more space. Now I'm able to say, well, you know what? While all that's great, ego, thank you, I'm going to respond in this new way. The 4th stage, and this is ultimately life goal in a sense that some of us, might be able to evolve into and not all of us. This is what we think of when we think of enlightenment, ego integration, where we are able to maintain the awareness that we are just consciousness, where we are less and less shifting back into the stories and into the reactivity. I lay these out in stages, however, it's not a sequential process. We don't check the box of 1 and then we don't evolve into 2. More often than not, once you evolve and you develop the habit of observing your thoughts, so what you'll start to find is you fluctuate between stages 2 and 3, where sometimes, I go right into ego reactivity, and other times I'm able to maintain that more responsive space. So none of this is sequential. Once we pass one stage, we're not forever going to not go back. Sometimes we go back and forth between these stages. It's a constant evolution. But ego work is incredibly important because a lot of us are identifying with stories that are not who we are. We are quite literally such an expansive, conscious awareness that has choice in each and every moment. We just have to practice cultivating that choice. I hope you found this video helpful.